What did the fundamentalists say to the burning Dollar General? That's one strange fire. So in this video, we're going to talk about fundamentalism, where it came from, how it developed, talking about John MacArthur, and in talking about Gresham Machen, an analysis of fundamentalism. Let's go! F is for friends who can't drink together. U is for you can't wear pants if you're a girl. N is for no drums. I actually don't think that we should have drums in church, so. I can say that though, I'm a drummer. Let's pop us in before we begin. So is John MacArthur a fundamentalist? Yes. I'm just joshing. But to explain John MacArthur, you have to go back a little bit further to actually explore the history and development of fundamentalism. Hey, Editing Bobbert here, and I just wanted to pop in real quick and explain a little pet peeve of mine that I have about most isms, words with isms in it. The problem with isms is that they are terms that most people use to describe other people, and that those people actually don't use those terms to describe themselves. And so with the movement fundamentalism is a very, very complicated movement. And his relationship to fundamentalism is complicated, as we'll see. And there can be two different ways that someone can use an ism to describe something, technically or dispositionally.
But in Presbyterian circles, the controversy started really in 1922 when Harry Emerson Fosdick fired the first shot. He preached a sermon, "Shall the fundamentalists win?" Mm-hmm. He sort of said these fundamentalists were bad Christians for trying to exclude other people from the church.
In response to some of these modern challenges, some evangelicals, they identified the beliefs that they thought were most central. One was inerrancy, and this is the idea that the Bible doesn't have any errors. The virgin birth, of course, that's a miracle that many liberals and moderns are now denying. Likewise, they affirmed substitutionary atonement, bodily resurrection of Christ, and finally they affirmed the miracles of Christ.
Like looking at the 5 major things that liberalism denies that are fundamental to the Christian faith, and then reacting essentially. And by the way, when I say fundamentalist, for me, and I think I can say this in part because didn't come out of fundamentalism, I don't really mean that as a bad thing. Fundamentalism is a very complicated and convoluted and diverse movement.
Probably the most important is you can see fundamentalists on the one hand rejecting the liberal tendencies in the church and going against the prevailing new ideas that were coming out of the scientific community. And they wrap all these fights up, particularly when you get into the world wars in the 20th century, with an ongoing apocalyptic struggle that was being reinterpreted within the dispensational Zionist understanding of the Bible.
On top of that, you have us as an audience looking at the movement and watching a debate about whether or not someone is a fundamentalist. And there's the claim that once a fundamentalist, always a fundamentalist. On top of that, John MacArthur's ministry is very complicated.
My dad was asked by Bob Jones to speak there, but eventually Bob Jones turned on my father and made all kinds of false accusations against my dad. And it started because my dad showed a Billy Graham film, or somebody in the church showed a Billy Graham film in our church. That was the kiss of death. So Bob Jones went after my father as a compromiser and all of that.
And John was happy to leave because he didn't fit in.
And he's more educated than most fundamentalists, and he shares more things in common with Reformed theology than most fundamentalists do. Now, as time goes on and fundamentalism develops, they start to find some of their own things to bicker about amongst themselves, like lordship salvation.
Liberalism is just about dead, but in our conservative groups, heresies are coming in. That in conservative churches today, a new gospel is being preached, and that's the lordship gospel. That you are not saved until you make Jesus Lord. What do you do with the thief on the cross? Did he make Jesus Lord? They add something to what Jesus did for us on the cross.
And with the book, The Gospel According to Jesus, John MacArthur offered a death blow to the opposition. And it gave him some credibility as someone more than just a fundamentalist. I guess I should explain very briefly that one of the things that I don't love about the book is that the way that John MacArthur has articulated his position is distancing himself from Roman Catholicism, which says it's faith plus works, in order to be right with God, but over here you have just simple faith. But when you open up, look under the hood of the car, and you look at what faith is, John MacArthur defines faith as faith plus works. I got that from Tony Arsenal on the Reformed Brotherhood podcast. I thought that was a good point that he had made. And there's tons of things to appreciate from John MacArthur's ministry. His expositional preaching, I think, was an inspiration to pastors all over the world. And by and large, verse by verse expositional preaching like that and from his ministry it's just a blessing. It's a blessing in churches. I think that that's a really good rule of thumb. It's just to preach verse by verse through the Bible. And he showed that it can be done multiple times. When I listen to John MacArthur, I just feel like I'm home. Like he just is a fatherly, grandfatherly voice. There's something about the way that he has been able to communicate that just like he says something with such confidence that when he says it, you're like, yeah, that's probably it. To me, when I say that John MacArthur is a form of fundamentalism, I don't mean that as a derogatory thing. I actually just mean that in the historical sense of the term. Look, liberalism was a problem, and this was the way that these dudes decided to deal with it, and along come other figures that mature and develop theologically in their own ways. And even my disagreements with the developments and the formation of it have to do with methodology. My disagreements are just methodological. I don't think that that's necessarily good for the church long term to be a fundamentalist. I'm also not discounting a lot of people's experiences growing up in fundamentalism, coming out of fundamentalism, that yes, there was a lot of abusive things that had taken place over time, a lot of weird ways of breaching people's consciences, like you can't like dress a certain way, you can't listen to a certain kind of music. Like I think that there were a lot of popish overreaches from fundamentalists toward their people and in their dogma and doctrines that they had produced over the years. That's true as well. It's life. Fundamentalism had no other choice than to develop and mature and get more precise about certain things, which MacArthur did. But if you go back to its inception, there's a figure in and around the fundamentalist controversy that shows us a better way to begin to engage with liberalism. And that man's name is Gresham Machen. So you can't talk about the fundamentalist controversy without talking about the Presbyterian controversy of the 1920s.
People thought something was going on at Princeton, and something was going on at Princeton, although I think it still remained fairly civil on campus. The board of directors, which was responsible for the theological content, for the faculty content of the seminary's program, it had been majority conservative board of directors. It became now minority conservative board of directors. And it was at that point that Machen decided with other conservatives to found Westminster Seminary in 1929 in Philadelphia.
And you can't talk about confessionalism and reformed combative war with liberalism and the most effective and biblical ways to do so without mentioning Gresham Machen. And it is pronounced Gresham.
What's important to see about that Protestant movement of ecumenism that was going on from the reunion of the old school and new school Presbyterians in 1869. And Presbyterians were prominent in this Protestant ecumenical endeavor. It was also very much a social gospel endeavor. These people wanted to Christianize America. He saw, though, that these people were also guilty of a kind of white Christian nationalism, and he was opposed to using the church in that way.
I've mentioned him a couple of times on this channel, and I just want to say, if I haven't made it clear already, that Machen is one of the greatest Christian minds of the 20th century. He's a hero. We should pour over his writings, and consider deeply his works, especially his work, Christianity and Liberalism. Also, if it isn't clear up to this point, most of the work that I'm going to do on this channel is going to be rooted in Machen's takes in that work. Now, his opinion, and I think he was right, was that liberalism is incompatible with Christianity because it's a false religion. Modern inventions and the industrialism that has been built upon them have given us, in many respects, a new world to live in. Bada bing, bada vink. We can no more remove ourselves from that world than we can escape the atmosphere that we breathe. But these things were playing into one another, where it wasn't just technological innovation in industry, and it wasn't just liberalism, but these things kind of were flowing into themselves as separate rivers into one big river that evangelicals needed to face. Which I just think is just incredibly helpful, because one of the first videos I put on this channel, I said, "What's up, YouTube?" I don't know what comes first, liberalism or technology, in contributing to the social imaginary that evangelicals have to confess in.
We live in an unprecedented time in human history where we can actually imagine that we are completely sovereign over who we are. Completely sovereign. Technology has shaped how we think about what it means to be a human being as those who can transcend ourselves.
And there are some days, depending on whether or not I had Taco Bell the night before, that I think, well, it's actually technology that influences the way that we think and the way that we see ourselves, and hence that has been where some of our liberal theology and ideas have come from. No. It's actually the liberalism that has driven the technological innovation and given us the... I don't really know, but Machen had a way of bringing those two things together. Machen had a way of in a sense, it doesn't really matter which has come first, the chicken or the egg. It's just that these are the enemies of our day. And then the question is, what is the most Christian way to do combat with these problems? Machen, in Christianity and Liberalism, essentially comes at liberalism as a religion, and thus from the position of the Christian religion. And he takes the whole system of the Christian religion and forces it to face off with liberalism, and shows how it as a religion fails. And the way that he does this is he essentially walks through the Westminster Confession of Faith and discusses each of the major issues and uses the system of the Christian religion, specifically Reformed Christianity, which is biblical Christianity, and shows how Christianity is what the modern man must believe instead of the false religion of liberalism. Now, compare that with the way that the fundamentalists approached liberalism. They identified the 5 main points of liberalism, and then they made 5 points in reaction to each of those things. You could say that that's comparing and contrasting and combating one system with another, but it just wasn't as exhaustive and as deep and as comprehensive and as biblical and as nuanced and as interwoven as Machen's.
Most serious liberals took Machen's arguments seriously because he was not engaged in mere polemics. He was engaged in polemics, but he was trying to do something that was serious and trying to take the other person's point of view into perspective as much as possible. He said, I never call myself a fundamentalist. I call myself a Calvinist. If the choice has to be, if it's only between fundamentalism and modernism, then I am a fundamentalist of the most pronounced stripe. But I prefer to call myself a Reformed Christian or Calvinist, not a fundamentalist, because he thought that fundamentalism really was trying to reduce Christianity to something of a bare few points of fundamentals.
And so that idea, that contrast between a confessional way of doing things and a fundamentalist way of doing things has really shaped the way that I see myself interacting with liberalism and political issues around me in general, and then also even interacting with others in evangelicalism that are Orthodox Christians. Confessionally engaging with those around me, confessing the faith in the cloud, taking your confessional glasses, putting them on, and looking at things through that lens, and saying, through the system of what I believe the Bible teaches, I'm going to engage with this issue. Now, confessionalism is more able to prepare someone to combat false ideas than the fundamentalist way of doing things in a more just reactionary way. We're just going to react to the bad. Here's the bad, we aren't that, and if you don't agree with not being that, then you aren't a Christian. You deny the supernaturality of the faith? Well, you must affirm the supernaturality of the faith, and that is a fundamental. But rather, Machen is able to show how supernaturality is connected to the rest of our Christian faith. Now, because of this, because there's a similarity where Machen is attacking and combating the denial of the supernaturality of the faith, but he's doing so in a way that's connecting it with the rest of his system, the church, Christ as mediator. The fundamentalists see his ability to combat liberalism so effectively, and they need him. And so he's used. And I would even suggest, if I had to go on a limb, I would imagine that plenty of fundamentalists use Machen to this day. Why? Because he was good, and I've just told you why he was good. But the problem with this is that then you look at Machen and you say, well, Machen, or people that are like Machen, are fundamentalists. And that's just not simply the case. And his mindset going into this combat was so different enough to be able to recognize how he wasn't like the fundamentalists, and yet he also realized that he shared some of the same concerns as fundamentalists, but his different mindset was just so significant that he did need to make some qualifiers like, well, I guess if you want to call me one, whatever, but I want to be a really, really good one. So if there's like a spectrum, it's like, well, there's the really purely reactionary way of being a fundamentalist, then there's a little bit more of the John MacArthur way, and then Machen all the way over here. And if you have to consider him a fundamentalist, may it be that he's the best kind. And what kind is that? Confessionally reformed. I wonder if this is a good analogy, where it's like if you're riding in a car with a fundamentalist and they're just telling you everywhere not to turn. Don't turn here, don't turn here, don't turn here. And Machen is Google Maps, where you can zoom out and see the whole thing, and then you can zoom in and it'll show you in a second, I'm about to have to turn right, which means don't turn left. But you can zoom out and then zoom back in, and that's what his Christianity and liberalism is able to do. And it's actually almost kind of a crash course in Reformed Christianity, but it's contrasting itself with and combating liberalism as a religion. This is what they think, this is what we think, this is part of their system in this way, and it's part of our system in this way. And Christians are not that. I've had a couple people comment on here, why are you still a Baptist when all your heroes are Presbyterians? Well, see my previous video. So this is what's behind, in part, what's behind so often in my videos as I close them out, why I say, keep confessing. Stay confessional and combat liberalism from a confessional spirit and a confessional mindset, and not just a reactionary mindset. Go read Machen's Christianity and Liberalism if you have not yet, and try to learn from him how to view these issues that we face today from a confessional lens. And stay Baptist, my friends.